All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pei Hey for the year 5785, the Tilson family from Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shimon Drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Talmud Torah sponsors for Cheshvan Abad Lina Latova, Stephen Terry Zinn, in honor of their granddaughter Devorah Eliana Zinn and memory of Dr. Zinn's father Bunim Tzvi Ben Chaim. Shmuel Rabin Karapkin, in the Schosser of Furshtim of Rabin's cousin Binyamin Chaim Pesach Ben Moshe Chana, and commission of the yard site of Rabin's mother Pasa Mira Bas Chaim, Dr. Moshe and Ellen Gevant, in memory of Dr. Gevant's parents Yaakov Meir Ben Moshe and Shena Bas Abba Zichron Libracha, and Dr. Bezad and Yamina Safar of Los Angeles, and the merit of a speedy and full recovery for Esther Bracha Bas Chaya. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Hashem return our hostages, b'shalom and b'karav, and our holy soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. Let's see. With that, let us begin. Today's daf is Kuf Nun Daled 154, and we are picking up on Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Beis. We are picking up Amar Balazar. So Balazar says as follows: 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. Amar Balazar. So we'll say, remember again, we had an interesting machlokes between Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan, which essentially mirrored the machlokes between Rabbi Meir and the Chacham in the Mishnah. Namely, again, if you have a situation where a gift was made, the giver is claiming that at the time of the gift he was a shchimira, and now Baruch Hashem he recovered. The recipient is claiming that no, you were a bari, you were completely healthy. And again, obviously, nafkamina will be the giver wants to claim that the gift is no longer valid. He doesn't have an obligation to execute, because since it was a matna shchimra was given al t'nai, and therefore again he has the ability to go ahead and void it, and the recipient says no, you're totally healthy, which means that the gift stands no matter what. So a whole machlokes in terms of how to go ahead and assess that. So remember again, we had a machlokes in the Mishnah, which we'll come back to in just a little bit, but what we just saw before was Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan, and Rabbi Yaakov essentially says that mosi mechaver lavaraya. So therefore again, if the recipients want to go ahead and extract the gift, they are the extractors, and therefore the burden of proof is upon them. Rabbi Nassan says essentially we look at whatever the status is now. Whatever his status is now, we assume that that is the same status that was. Therefore, if he's a bari, so we assume that he was a bari at the time of the gift, and if he wants to claim that he wasn't a bari, he has to bring a raya that he was a shchiv meirah. If it's a shchiv meirah now, then we assume he was a shchiv meirah at the time of the gift as well. So whatever Rabbi Nassan's his premise is, whatever is your status now, we assume that retroactively was your status as well to the time that the gift was made. So now the Gemara from Rabbi Lazar, this same machlokes, this same dispute, Rabbi Yaakov, and Rabbi Nassan by matana is the same machlokes we find by tuma. This is actually very interesting. What's the case by tuma? This nan bikas, so bika. So I'll say so bika literally again it means a valley. In this context, what it really means is a field, an open field. Now Rashi points out over here, the Rashbam points out over here that the bika in question is an enclosed field, a very large enclosed field. So the Gemara says, what's the status of a bika? So first I'll take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment, because a couple of important Rashbams. Kimach lokas, kihechi dinechlaku, Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Nassan. It's in the Rashbam about, in the wide lines, about 6 lines in. Kimach lokas, kihechi dinechlaku, Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Nassan, mematana stam, iyaz linan basar hashta, O basar cheskas nechasim, hachanam yafligu gabe tuma. So we'll say, so the same way that Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov have a machlokes in terms of the machlokes by matana. Rabbi Yaakov saying, Hamotzi mechaver lavaraya. Rabbi Nassan saying we go what we call azlinan basar hashta. We go over whatever your status is right now. The same way they have that machlokes. Shimba so too hachinami afligu gabe tuma. The Rashbam says this same machlokes comes up by tuma. And the Rashbam frames this very beautifully. He says Shimba adam lebezdin v'nishal al shenichnas lebeka ve'ein yadua masay nichnas. So we'll say, so in the case in question is as follows. The case in question is a person enters into a bika, into a field. Now we know that at a certain point in time there was tumah in the field. but the shaila is we don't know, did this person come in contact with the tumah or not? So let's say, for example, it's Ruvain, right? Ruvain enters into an enclosed field, and we know that at a certain point in time there was a grave there, or there was a corpse there. And Ruvain's not sure, did he come in contact with the tumah? Did he not come in contact with the tumah? So we'll say, so this is a case of safek tumah. How do you resolve safek tumah? How is safek tumah resolved? The answer is, it depends. What does it depend on? Where did the safek occur? Safek tumah b'rshus harabim is dealt with in a mekel fashion. Safek tumah b'rshus harabim, mekel, l'kula, right? And therefore, again, we would rule that he's tar. Safek tumah b'rshus hayochid is dealt with l'chumra. What's the source of that? We've seen this many times before. The source of this is sota. Right, sota. The whole issue of sota is a safek tumah b'rshus hayochid, and we deal with it in a machmir fashion. So I will say, so interestingly enough, what the Gemara is going to point out over here is as follows. What is the status of an enclosed field? Is it rishus hayochid or is it rishus harabim? And interestingly enough, the answer is, it depends on the time of year. How so? Look at the Rashbam. This is fascinating. So apparently during the summertime, when it's harvest season, you have workers in and out, and therefore again the field is considered to be a rishus harabim. On the other hand, during the rainy season, which is when you're planting stuff, people don't really walk through the field, right? A, you don't want to ruin the crops, and B, there's nothing really to do over there. It's already been planted. It's considered to be a rishus hayachid. So interestingly enough, the same field, its status is dependent on the season. So during the summertime, it's rishus harabim. During the winter time, during the rainy season, it's going to be considered Rishus Hayochid. Rishus Hayochid. Okay, fine. So that's enough over there. So let's go back now. Let's go back to the Gemara. So listen to this. So this nan bika. So now we know the case. Reuven comes to us, and Reuven says, "I entered into a particular field, and there's a safek whether or not there was a grave or a corpse, or I came in contact with tumah when I was in that field." So how do we resolve this? So here we go. Bika bimosachama rishus hayochid l'Shabbos or rishus harabim l'tumah. So this field during the summertime, it is considered to be a rishus hayochid for Shabbos, but a rishus harabim for tumah. Now we'll say the Gemara throws in Shabbos over here, but Shabbos is always going to be the same because this field is enclosed. For Hilchos Shabbos, it's considered to be a rishus hayochid, a private domain. Now, the truth is, Rashbam points out over here, it's not really a classic Rishus HaYachid, it's more what we would call a karfeif, because it's a much larger area, but we're not going to get into this right now. For our purposes, because it's an enclosed area that is not a Rishus HaRabim, therefore, by definition, for Hilchos Shabbos, it is a Rishus HaYachid. So if you were to carry from this field into Rishus HaRabim, or throw an object from this field to Rishus HaRabim, you would be in violation of Hilchos Shabbos. So, and that's not seasonal. That's not seasonal, that's halacha l'maisa all the time. So listen to this. So if it's during the summertime, Rishus HaYachid Shabbos or Rishus HaRabim l'Tumah, so it is considered to be Rishus HaYachid for Shabbos, but Rishus HaRabim for Tumah. Because remember again, during the summertime, you have workers going in and out, and therefore halacha l'maisa, it is considered to be a public area. And therefore, if you were to have a safek tumah in Rishus Harabim, that would be dealt with l'kula. Bimos hagishamim in the rainy season, Rishus hayachid lekan ulekan. But ultimately, again, if it's Rishus hayachid for tumah, during the rainy season, it is considered to be a Rishus hayachid, both for Shabbos as well as for Tumah. The Gemara says, Rava comes along and says, the Rashbam points out, Rava is saying something different. This is only true if, let's say, we're talking about a field that is experiencing its first winter versus its first summer. However, again, okay, so Rava is bringing an additional piece of information that essentially says that halacha l'maisa, once this field undergoes a rainy season, then by definition it's considered to be Rishus HaYachid during all seasons. In other words, the only time it is considered to be a Rishus HaRabim is during its first summer. But once it undergoes a rainy season, then Allah Chamaisa, it is considered to be a Rishus HaYachid for everything. Now we'll say, now what does this have to do with our previous Gemara? So remember again, we would plug in the Shittas of Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan to this particular case. How so? So if you go back to the Rashbam for just a moment, the Rashbam says as follows. The Rashbam says, if you look at the Rashbam, Kimachlokes, towards the end of that Rashbam, he says as follows. He says, Chazinon im'ata kishenishal b'mos hachama heintar dazina basar hashta Rabbi Nassan. So we'll say, so how would Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov resolve this? Rabbi Nassan would say like this. Rabbi Nassan would say, really we decide this case based on when you're asking the Shaila. If you're asking the Shaila now, during the rainy season, then it's a Safek Tumah Birshus Hayachid. If you ask during the summertime, it's a case of Safek Tumah Birshus Harabim. So Rabbi Nassan, remember, because Rabbi Nassan, the phrase from Rabbi Nassan is, Azlinon Basar Hashta. We look at the reality as it is now and base our psak on that. That would be Rabbi Nassan. On the other hand, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yaakov, the Rashbam says, Rabbi Yaakov, the Azl Basar Chazaka, Hamitar al Chaskasa Vitar. Rabbi Yaakov, on the other hand, says, Hamotzi mechaver lavaraya. They all say, what is Hamotzi mechaver lavaraya? What other halachic principle does that equate to? Chazaka. Chazaka, right? So therefore, again, he would apply chazaka in this case, and chazaka says an individual is tar. That was your chazaka, that you were tar. And therefore, again, we would assume that chazaka remains until there is something significant to be able to change that chazaka. Okay, all the Gemara just wanted to show was the same machlokes Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan. Ultimately, that applies by matana, would also apply by tumah. But for our purpose, and let's just crystallize this before we move on, the machlokes over here is, and this was the interesting case of our Mishnah, when you had a gift that was being made, and the gift, the document itself, made no mention of whether or not the giver was a shchiv meirah or was a bari. So now, the giver claims I was a shchiv meirah and I recovered. Therefore, no gift. It was matna shchiv meirah, no gift. The recipient says, no, you were a bari, and ultimately, again, it's a bona fide gift, no matter what your particular state of health is. What do we do? So there's a machlokes in Mishnah, right? So ultimately, again, Rabbi Meir says that the giver has to bring a raya that he was a shchiv meirah, and the Chachamim say motzi mechaver alav a raya. That's the same machlokes as Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Yaakov says, Rabbi Nassan says, let's go Rabbi Nassan, Azlina Basar Hashta, whatever your state is now, we assume that that's the state you were in at the time of your gift. Rabbi Yaakov says, Amotzi mechaver alav haraya. Okay, beautiful, we're not finished yet. Says the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, suppose the top of Kufnan Dalid. So let's go back for just a second. So remember, now the Chachamim say, this is the same case, right? So Ruvain went ahead and gave something to Shimon, so they come to Beis Din now, Ruvain claims, I was a shchiv meirah, and now Baruch Hashem I made a recovery, and so I don't have to give you anything. Shimon says, you were a bari, and therefore your gift is a bona fide gift. Baruch Hashem, happy you're feeling well, but your gift was still a bona fide gift. So the Chachamim say, Motzi mechaber alav haraya. Shimon, you want to extract property from Ruvain, you have to prove that Ruvain was a bari, that Ruvain was healthy at the time of the gift. So the Gemara now asks, Tavav Kuf Nun Dal 154a, Raya b'mai. So when we say Motzi mechaber alav haraya, what is considered to be a proper raya? What is considered to be a proper proof in this case? Rav Huna Amar Raya be'edim. Rav Huna says witnesses. So Shimon's got to bring witnesses that Reuven in fact was healthy at the time of the gift. Rav Chizra Rav Huna Amri Raya B'Kiyum Ashtar. So no, interestingly enough, the Raya over here is certification of the document. Okay, so we're going to explain this. Rav Huna says, Raya be'edim kamiflagi b'plukted Rabbi Yaakov Rabbi Nassan. So we'll say, interestingly enough, so Rav Huna says that the Raya in question is edim. And he holds that really what this machlokes is in the Mishnah is the same machlokes as Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan that we just said before. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. So the Gemara says, oh, actually, no, I'm sorry, not yet. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Nassan, Rabbi Yaakov. So we'll say, so again, this is what we actually just mentioned before. So the machlokes Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan, right? Rabbi Yaakov holding a Motzi mechaver alav haraya, Rabbi Nassan as linon basar hashta, is the same machlokes in the Mishnah of Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. And therefore, again, Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Nassan, Rabbanon, Rabbi Yaakov. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Nassan, 3 lines down from the top. Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbanon, Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Meir, Azl Basar Hashta, Rabbi Nassan. So Rabbi Meir also goes, Azlina Basar Hashta. We look at what is now, and we use current reality as an indicator of what was the reality at the time of the shtar. V'achikar mas nisin. Amar shchimir hayisi v'achshav ani bari v'chozrani bi v'hein omrim bari hayisa alav lahavi raya be'edim sheshchimir haya. So ultimately, again, so what does Rabbi Meir say in the Mishnah? Rabbi Meir says, okay, so Reuven says he was a shchimira. Shimon says, no, you were a bari. So what happens? What's the halacha? So Rabbi Meir will say, fine, you have to bring Eidim. You have to bring proof. And the Chachamim will say, ultimately, Amotzi mechaber alav haraya. V'Rav Chisda v'Rava bar Afuna, back to the Gemara. V'Rav Chisda v'Rava bar Afuna amri, raya b'kiyam ashtar. So Rav Chisda and Rava bar Afuna say, no. They say the raya in question is not Eidos. The raya over here is certification of the document. Certification of the document. So the Gemara says, so according to this approach, what's the machlokas? Kamiflagi b'moda b'shtar shakasu tzarach l'kaimo. So we'll say this is very interesting. According to Rav Chisda and Rabbi bar Afuna, the machlokas Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is not the machlokas Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Nassan. In other words, right? According to the first approach, the machlokas in the Mishnah of Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is the machlokas of Azlina and Basra Hashta versus Hamotzi mechaber alav haraya. In the second version, that's not the machlokas. It's actually very interesting. The machlokas is moda b'shtar shakasvo tzarach l'kaimo. This is very interesting. If everyone agrees that the document is authentic, does the document require kiyum shtaris? Does it require certification? Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says over b'moda lova b'shtar shakaso ve'inu mezuyaf ela shetoim parativ o shchimir hayisi o shtar amano o shtar pasimu. We'll say, what do you do in the following scenario? Let's say that you have, and you can plug this into any case where there's a shtar, right? In our case, that was the matana. But let's say again, there's a document that says, right, Reuven lent Shimon $1,000. So we'll say, let's say in this case over here, everyone agrees, obviously the lender, Reuven, holds that the shtar is authentic. Let's say Shimon says, I agree to the writing of the shtar, but then he qualifies that statement. And he says, but I paid it. Or he gives some other excuse about why the shtar is not enforceable. See, he's admitting that the shtar was written, right, with his consent, but Lamaisa, he is putting forth a different set of circumstances. So if everyone involved in the transaction admits that the shtar was written legally, does a shtar like that require certification or not? That's our machlokis over here. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir savar mod b'shtar shakaso en tzarach l'kaimo. Meir says this way. Meir says, and Moshe says, now let's plug this into the Mishnah. Right? In the Mishnah's case, everyone is agreeing that a shtar matana was written from Reuven to Shimon. Right? Everyone is agreeing. What's their point of contention? What was the state of the giver of Reuven at the time that he wrote the shtar? So Meir holds where everyone agrees that the shtar was legitimately written. Ultimately, again, there's no need to go ahead and there's no need to certify it. So we'll say, so therefore, again, what's happening over here is that halacha l'maisa, according to Rabbi Meir, the giver has to prove that he was a shchimira. But ultimately, again, the document is a valid document. On the other hand, the Rabbanan hold, the Rabbanan say, no, even if all the parties admit that the shtar is a legitimate shtar, therefore what? Nevertheless, it still requires certification. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, that would ultimately result in hamotzi mechabera alav haraya. Okay? The Gemara says, ifligu ba. But they already have this machlokes once. We've already seen this machlokes before. This anya ein ne'eman leposlo divrei Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, what's the case over here? Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam is in the last of the intermediate wide lines, or second to last. This ein ne'eman. Rashbam says, Disnan hasam ha'edim she'amru ksav yadenu huzeh. Aval anusim hayinu, kitanim hayinu, psulim hayinu. Suppose that is an interesting case. So let's say again, you have a shtar, whatever it is. Shtar says that Reuven lent Shimon $1,000. Now what happens? The witnesses come along, and the witnesses say, "Yep, that's our signature." So they testify that that's their signature, but they qualify their signature. They say, "Yes, we did sign it, but we were coerced." Or we were minors, or we were puzzle, invalid to give this edus. So what's the halacha? Hari elush ne'emanin shapesh sha'asahu apesh shehitir. So generally we would say that they are believed. Now, why are they believed? Because once we have the concept Pesha Asar Pesha, what does that mean? That since the Eidos is coming through them, right, they are the ones who, so to speak, create the transaction, they are also believed to qualify the transaction. The Tanya B'Gemara Ein Ne'eman on the postal Div Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, on the other hand, disagrees. Rabbi Meir says they are believed to certify the document, but they are not believed to invalidate it. Upalagamasis and the Lochayish La Pesha Asar Gabi Shtaras the Lo Nechshadu Yisrael Al Kach. That was Rabbi Meir says that's because when someone says yes, that's my signature, but I was coerced, or but I was a katan, or I'm an apostle. So then what they're doing essentially is they're eroding their own, cheskas kashrus, right? They're eroding their own credibility. And Rabbi Meir says you're not believed to erode your own credibility. So ultimately, again, at the end of the day, so fine. So the Gemara says, we've already had this machlokes before. If that's the machlokes over here, we've already learned this. Back to the Gemara for just a moment. The Gemara says, they already argued about this principle once before. The Sanya Ein Ne'eman on the postal of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says if witnesses come along and they say yes, that's our signature on the star, but, and what's the but? But, again, we were coerced. But we were psulim, we were kitanim. That ultimately, again, they're not believed. They're not believed. Why are they not believed? Because, again, Rabbi Meir holds that mode b'shtar shekasva intzarach l'kaimo. That once you admit that the shtar was written, there is no need for kiyum shtaros. The chum say ne'emanim. The chum say no, that they're ne'eman. So we'll say, so again, if that's the machlokes over here, if that's the machlokes in our Mishnah, why do they need to state it again? It's already been stated once. To which the Gemara says, no, you need both keys. I'll tell you why. If you would just brought down the brayso, in that case, the Eidim are believed. Why do I say? Because the Eidim are the ones who create the transactional effectiveness. So because they create transactional effectiveness, they have a tremendous amount of power, and therefore perhaps they have the ability to undermine the effectiveness of the transaction as well. But over here in the Mishnah, who delav kol kamine. But over here, I'll say in the Mishnah, remember again, who is undermining the effectiveness of the shtar? It's the giver. Maybe the giver doesn't have that level of power. Itmar Baha, and if it would have just said the Mishnah case, Baha Kam Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir only holds his particular position in the Mishnah, Ava Baha, but maybe in the Braysa, maybe he admits that he agrees with the Rabbanon, therefore it's Tzricha. Fine. So we'll say, so bottom line, two different ways to interpret the Machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanon in our Mishnah. V'chin Amar Rabba. So we'll say, so now the Gemara says, Rabba said as well, Raya be'edim. So we'll say, so remember again, essentially what we have over here is a fundamental Machlokes in terms of how to interpret the Raya in the Mishnah, right? The Chachamim say, let's just circle back for just a second. Reuven gives a gift to Shimon, right? Reuven now comes along and says the gift is void. Why? Because Reuven claims I was a shchiv mira at the time of the gift. Now Baruch Hashem had a refuah shalema. Matna shchiv mira is a gift with a tanai. Therefore the gift is void. Nothing doing. Shimon says, no, you weren't a shchiv mira. You're perfectly healthy, and therefore the gift is a bona fide gift. What do we do? So Machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, we're focusing on the Chum. The Chum say amotzi mechavero alav haraya. Right? Remember again, Rabbi Meir says the burden of proof is upon the giver. Right? Because right now he's a bari, so the burden of proof is upon him to prove that he was a shchiver at the time of the gift. Chum say no. The burden of proof is upon Shimon, the extractor. What raya? What are we looking for from Shimon in this particular scenario? So again, Rav Huna, Eidim, Rav Chisda, and now Baravuna Kiyom Mashtar. Now, depending on which way you go in this understanding, will determine the Machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. Okay, so let's go back there. V'chein Amar Rabba Raya be'edim. Rabba also said the Raya, when the Chum say Mosimi Chaver Lava Raya, they mean witnesses. Amalei Abaye, my time. Well, what's the reason? Inema midekulu ksiv behu. Maybe you'll say like this, because generally the reason you need eidos is as follows. Because generally, in a matnas shchimera, we spoke about this yesterday. There's a particular verbiage that is employed. What would you normally write? So he says, "Ksiv." I'm sorry. Inei kulu ksiv bahu kad have mahalech al ragloi b'shuka ubahalo ksiv ba. So we'll say so again. Normally, again, in a healthy person's gift, we'll say it's actually interesting. It seems to be that they would indicate in the shtar that this was a matnas bari. How would you indicate in a shtar that this was a healthy person's gift? You would use the following verbiage. Ruvain made this gift when he was walking on his own 2 feet in the shuk. Now let's say, but what if he wasn't walking in the shuk at the time of the gift? It doesn't matter. It was an expression. It was an expression that was used. It's very fascinating. So in order to show that it's a matnas bari, they would employ this lashon. When Reuven was walking on his own 2 feet in the marketplace, he went ahead and conveyed this property to Shimon. The fact that that phrase is missing compromises the authenticity of the shtar. Shma mina, shchiv merahavi. So the fact that that line is not in there, it must be that it's a matnas shchimera. The Gemara says, 1 second, adarabba, fakir, just the opposite. Midikuluk sivbu, whenever there's a matnas shchimera, that also has a particular verbiage. What's the verbiage that's used? Kad katze verami ba'arisa. Normally a matnas shchimera will say has the following lashon. What's the lashon? I, Ruvain, right when I was confined to my deathbed. It would have that lashon also by matnas shchimera. V'halo ksivba, and yet in this case over here, this case in question, that lashon is not used. What do you see from there? Shmamina bari havi. What do you see from that? That it's a matnas bari. Matnas bari. Seikal me'marhachi, v'ikal me'marhachi. Right. Right, so by the way, interestingly enough, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a shtar that doesn't have either of the lashonos. Fascinating. Which I will say, who would have ever thought, up until now, I don't think we've ever been sensitive to this, that you have to indicate, in other words, we always thought that the obligation was to prove that it was a matnas shchimera, but you don't have to prove that it's a matnas bari. No, apparently it seems to be that people would indicate, is this a matnas bari or is it a matnas shchimera? The problem in this case over here is the shtar has neither of these lashonos. So it doesn't have the lashon of I was walking on my 2 feet in the shuk, and it doesn't have the lashon of I was laying in my deathbed. So what do you do in a case like this? So the Gemara says, so therefore again you could interpret this to be a matnas shchimera or a matnas bari. What do you do in a case like this? Uki mamona v'cheskas marei. Ultimately again, so we'll say, therefore, what's the halacha in a case of suffix mammon? So, chazaka, what do you do when you have a suffix in mammon? We assume that whoever is currently in possession of it is the owner. And if you want to change that, what do you need? A raya. And what kind of raya? Eidos. Beautiful. Ubeplukta to Rabbi Yochanan. And this whole thing is marred in machlokes. So Rabbi Yochanan Amaraya be'edim. Rabbi Yochanan says the raya. Remember again, we'll say going back to the Chum. The Chum say motzimi chaver alav raya. Reuven gave a gift to Shimon. Reuven is claiming it was a matnas shchimera. Shimon is claiming it was a matnas bari. We're obviously talking about a case where the shtar itself doesn't point in either direction. The lashon is missing. So what does Shimon need to do in order to prove his point? So Rabbi Yochanan says edim. So right, Shimon has to bring eidos that Reuven was a shchimera at the time of the gift. Rabbi Shimon Lakish Amaraya became a shtar. Rabbi Shimon Lakish says no. It requires certification of the document. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan is catched to Reish Lakish. Ma'aseh b'Bnei Brak. So this is actually an interesting case here. There was an episode in Bnei Brak. What happened in Bnei Brak? Be'echad shemachar b'nichse aviv. So listen to this. So there was a father, we'll call him Yaakov. Yaakov had multiple sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. What happens? So Levi sold off, so Yaakov died, and Levi sold off some of the estate's property. Okay. Umeis, and then Levi died. Ubau b'nei mishpacha ve'irur lomar katan haya b'shas misa. What ended up happening is Reuven and Shimon come along to the purchase, and they say, guys, the sale is this Levi's sale is void. Why? Levi was a katan at the time of the sale. He had no right to start selling off estate property. He was a katan. Okay. Uba v'shalus Rabbi Akiva, mahu lebotko. So so now watch this. This whole thing goes south really fast. If you take a look at the Rashbam says over here, v'amdu alav b'nei mishpacha, v'kasach alay trahashta nechase b'cheskas yarshin kaimi, v'lo ba adayin le'elkos. So now the Rashbam says, what we are assuming this case over here is, we're going to disprove this in just a moment, but what we are assuming is the case is like this. Levi sold property, estate property, right? And then what happened? But the property was not yet transferred to the purchasers. Levi dies, the purchasers show up to take possession of their property. So now Reuven and Shimon say, no, the sale is void because Levi was a katan. At the time of the sale, he had no right to sell the estate property. Okay, so now what happens? So Ba v'shalu Rabbi Akiva mahu lebotko. Supposed to say they came before Rabbi Akiva. Now the purchasers said like this. The purchasers apparently did not have any other form of proof. So they came and they asked Rabbi Akiva, are we permitted to exhume the body in order to go ahead and see if Levi had physical signs of maturation? Right, the appearance of two hairs is enough to go ahead and establish that he was a gadol. So, can we exhume the body in order to prove that he has physical signs of maturation and therefore that the sale was valid? So, what happens? So the Gemara says, "Amar lahem, you are not permitted to desecrate the dead for this. Furthermore, va'od simanim asuyin lehishtanos la'achar misa. Furthermore, right, simanim, things could change, in other words, the body changes after a person dies. So what you see now on the body is not necessarily indicative of what was there or how it looked during life. So Rabbi Akiva seems to be saying two things. Number one, the answer is no, right? Because you can't desecrate a body for financial purposes. That's number one. Number two, even if you find something, it's not going to be a proof because halacha l'maisa, simanim change ultimately again even after the birth. It's interesting. It's very taken by this line. We like to think that, or not we like to think, but sometimes we think that although life is filled with the possibility of change, death is not. Death is not, right? Death is when the door closes on change. But it's possible that maybe at the end of the day what the Gemara says is that even after death, some change is possible. Simanim asuyin lehishtanos la'achar misa. Right? Simanim, certain things could change even after death. You'll ask yourself, but okay, so how do things change? I'm dead. So how do things change after death? So I'll say, so this is the profundity of leaving behind family. That sometimes, again, when a person leaves this world, what you can no longer do for yourself, your loved ones have the ability to do for you. And this is incredibly important, right? For those of us maybe who don't have parents in this world or all of our parents in this world and sometimes or loved ones, and we think that once they're no longer here in this world, the ability to do for them is no longer there. It's not true. The dead experience change as well. The difference just is the dead cannot affect change for themselves. But we, the living, have the incredible zechus and the incredible ability to affect change for the dead. I will say it is one of the greatest zechuyos we have, that when we learn li'ilui nishmos our loved ones, when we give tzedakah, when we do chesed, when we become better people because we are inspired by the memory of our loved ones, they experience change. Their neshamas experience change. They can't be the engines of that change, but we could be the engines of that change for them to experience even in the next world. Such a profound Gemara. All right, so the Gemara says as follows. So let's analyze this case a little bit. So Bishlama, Amud Beis. So Bishlama, Ledidi, Da'amin Araya Be'edim. So Rabbi Yochanan says like this. So according to me, this makes sense. Because I hold that in general, when we talk about Amotzi Mechavera Lava Raya, so Raya is with Edim. So Kiva Damar Lukuchos, Aisu Edim, Lo Ashkechos. So what happened in the case of Menei Brak? What happened in this case of Menei Brak? Right? So the purchasers say that Levi was a gadol. So what do the brothers say? What do Reuven and Shimon say? Okay, Levi was a gadol. What do they say? Bring edus, bring witnesses. Okay, you're making a claim. Fine, you're entitled to make a claim. Support your claim with witnesses. V'lo ashkechu. And ultimately, again, again, the purchasers were unable to go ahead and produce witnesses. And that's why they come to Rabbi Akiva and they say, that's why the witnesses say, Rabbi Akiva, are we allowed to exhume the body, to examine the body for physical signs of maturation? Because again, they were asked to furnish witnesses. They could not furnish witnesses, so therefore they asked to exhume the body. Rabbi Yochanan says, according to you, the Amrit Raya B'Kiyam Ashtar, but according to you, Reish Lakish, that the Raya, the proof in these cases, is certification of the document. The document was a legitimate document. I'm sorry, why are they asking Rabbi Akiva to exhume the body? Just simply, right? The threshold is so much lower. All you need is what? Certification of the document. You will say, by the way, how do you accomplish Kiyum Shtaris? We've learned this before. How do you accomplish Kiyum Shtaris? Right? You go to Beis Din, witnesses attest that it's their signature, Beis Din puts the stempel on it, and that's it. There's no exhuming bodies. What are you talking about? So here what Rabbi Yochanan is saying? Rabbi Yochanan is saying is the fact that the purchasers asked for the exhumation, I don't know if it's a word or not, but exhumation of the body, indicates to us that they couldn't produce witnesses. All right, so the inability to produce witnesses, looking for physical evidence that he was a gadol. But Lamaisa, if Raya is certification of document, we're not exhuming anything. Call up the witnesses, find out this right signatures, or find someone who recognizes the witnesses' signatures, certify the document that we're good to go. So Rabbi Yochanan uses as a proof that he is clearly right over Reish Lakish. So one second. Mi sabris and the chase becheskas bein b'shal kamer. The Gemara says, no, you've got the case wrong. So what we were saying before. We were assuming that what's the case? Who has the property? That the property was in the possession of the family members, right? That what had happened over here? Levi sold off property and Levi died, but he died before the property was ever transferred to the purchasers. So now, after the levaya, the purchasers show up. They say, "Hey, so sorry about your loss, but Levi, your brother, sold us property. You know, it's in your possession. Still hand it over." So whereas that's not the case. Mi sarvis nechasi bechezkas b'nei mishpacha kaimi v'ka'asu lekuchos uma'arari. Do you think that the case over here is where the property is in the possession of the family and the purchasers are coming to extract it from the family? That's not the case. Nechasi bechezkas lekuchos kaimi. No, the case over here is where Levi sold the property and purchasers took possession of the property. And now what's happening? V'ka'asu b'nei mishpacha v'kama'arari. Reuven and Shimon, the surviving brothers, are coming along to the purchaser and saying, give us back the property. So you'll see how this changes the story a lot. So the case over here the Gemara wants to suggest is where Levi not only sold the property, but transferred the property as well. So therefore the property is in the possession of the purchasers, and the brothers are showing up in order to get their property back from the purchasers. So I will say, take a look at the Rashman for just a moment. Va'asu yarshi, it's in the short lines, about 3 lines in. Va'asu yarshi v'kamari, va'amri katan haya, v'shalo kedin tafastem, tahasam gabi yarshim lo shayich kiyum shtarei. So I will say, so now it makes sense. Remember, I will say, the Yarshim, they don't have a shtar. There's no kiyum shtaros by them, right? Why don't they have a shtar? Because the shtar was between Levi and the purchasers. So for the Yarshim to prove their claim, kiyum shtaros is not a possibility. What's the only possibility? Only possibility? Eidos. And because there are no eidim, then what? Exhumation. Right? So the Gemara is like this. Now the story makes a lot more sense. How can I mistaber? Now this makes sense. So ideally, Reuven and Shimon would produce witnesses that Levi was a katan at the time of the sale, but that's kind of hard to produce witnesses like that. And clearly, in the case in question, they couldn't produce testimony like that. So therefore, again, they come to Rabbi Akiva, and what do they say, Rabbi Akiva? They say, Rabbi Akiva, allow us to exhume the body of our brother. So how can I mistaber? Now it's interesting. So now the story makes much more sense. The brothers, surviving brothers, Reuven and Shimon, go to Rabbi Akiva. They say, Rabbi Akiva, please allow us to exhume the body of Levi in order to prove that he was a katan at the time of the sale and to show that the sale wasn't valid. What does Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva says, you cannot desecrate the dead. What was the response? What was in the story, in the recorded story, what was the response? Ishtiku, silence, acceptance. So we'll say that makes a lot more sense if we're talking about brothers. talking about family. So the Gemara says, so I'll say, if you understand that it is the brothers who are making the request for exhumation, and Rabbi Akiva says we don't desecrate the dead, so it makes sense that the brothers, the family, no one wants to exhume the body. They figure this is the only way to go ahead and support our claim. Rabbi Akiva says you can't do it. The fact that they readily accept that, it makes more sense if Rabbi Akiva is talking to family members. Listen to this. But if Rabbi Akiva was talking to the purchaser, in other words, if the case was as we originally thought, namely what? That the property was still in the possession of the family, and the purchasers were trying to extract the property from the family, and it was the purchasers who come to Rabbi Akiva saying, let's exhume the body of Levi to see if he was in fact a gadol, then ultimately, again, when Rabbi Akiva says, sorry, we don't desecrate the dead, then they would have responded back. Amai shaski. Why would they just accept that? Lemru le anan zuzi havinale lenevel v'nevel. So again, why couldn't they say back to Rabbi Akiva? Again, listen, Rabbi Akiva, hear that? Money's money. Like, in other words, this is not right. I understand you don't want to desecrate the dead. We also don't want to lose money. And this person, Levi, sold us property. So we have every right to exhume his body in order to ascertain whether or not he was a gadol or a katan. So we'll say, so it's interesting. First of all, it's interesting about how people get when it comes to money, right? So we know this, right? You see it, like the Gemara says, there are three things, right? There are three ways in which you see the true nature of a person: koso, kiso, and kaso. So again, kiso, his pakim, means his money. You see a lot about people in terms of how they deal with money. And we've also, right, even the nicest and most mild-mannered of people, when it comes to money, a different side comes out. So again, the Gemara posits the fact that in the story, once Rabbi Akiva said we don't desecrate the dead for financial purposes, the fact that the claimant accepts that so readily makes more sense if you're dealing with family members. Right? So if you understand the cases that we just espoused, that the property is in the possession of the purchasers, the family members are trying to get it back, they want to exhume the body to show that he was a katan. Rabbi Akiva says we don't go ahead and desecrate the dead, and the claimant accepts it. That makes more sense if it's Reuven and Shimon the brothers. They'll accept that because they don't really want to do this to begin with. But if the case is as we originally thought, namely the property is with the family, and the purchaser is coming to extract it, and Rabbi Akiva says, I'm sorry, kavod ames, what are the purchasers going to say? Kavod ames, shmavod ames, right? Get that body out of there, right? Because we spent a lot of money on this property, and we have every right to see if the sale was a valid sale. So the fact that that does not come up indicates to us that it makes more sense this new way that the property is in the possession of the purchasers and it's the family members who are trying to extract it. So the Gemara says, no. Imi shumha, if that's what your proof is, so the Gemara says, Imi shumha lo iria, hachi kamarlo. Because ultimately, this is what Rabbi Akiva is saying. So what Rabbi Akiva is saying is like this. I would say it could very well be this is not a raya to the second version of the case. It could very well be that the case is as we said before, namely that halacha l'maisa, it was the family who still had the property and the purchaser coming to extract. So how do you understand Rabbi Akiva's statement? Rabbi Akiva is saying two things. Number one, remember when Rabbi Akiva says you cannot desecrate the dead for monetary purposes. We'll say, by the way, you should just know this is not a topic, but absolutely fascinating. There are cases like this that do come up, where let's say again you have to exhume a body for autopsy purposes in order for insurance claims or other things like that. So there's a lot of discussions in halacha about whether or not autopsy is permitted, exhumation is permitted for financial purposes. So it's interesting that Rabbi Akiva seems to be saying over here, we do not desecrate the dead for money. That's number one. But Rabbi Akiva is saying something else. V'od v'chitemru zil shakal l'navel v'nivel simanu asun l'shtanas la'achar misa. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, or maybe, if we go with the first version, right, where the property is with the family, and it's the purchaser who's trying to extract the money. So maybe the purchaser will say, you know what? Sorry, we don't care about the desecration of the dead. Money is money, right? Get that body out of there, and let's see if he's a gadol or not. Rabbi Akiva says, no. It doesn't matter. Why? Because simanin asuyin lehishtanos. So Rabbi Akiva is really saying two things. Number one, you can't desecrate the dead for financial purposes. That's number one. And number two, it's not going to help you. It's not going to help you, because at this point what you're trying to see is, does he have physical signs of maturation? And Rabbi Akiva says, I'm telling you, physical signs change after a person dies, and therefore halacha l'maaseh, you can't glean any raya from the present state of the body anyway. So what we originally thought that Rabbi Akiva saying one thing in two ways, he's in fact making two distinct statements. Number one, can't discredit a body for financial purposes. Number two, what you're looking for can't be accomplished because a body changes form after the person dies anyway. Okay, let's go back there. Sharab Shem and Lakish. So we'll say, by the way, just want to point out, we are still mired in our same machlokes. It's the same machlokes, right? In the Mishnah, so in the Mishnah, right? Remember again, Reuven gave Shimon a gift. Reuven is claiming he was a shchimira and he recovered. Shimon is claiming you are a bari. So what do we do in this case? So Shimon has to bring a proof that Reuven was in fact a shchimira. What kind of raya do you have to bring? These are ongoing machlokes. So one opinion says Eidos, witnesses. The other opinion says Kiyim Shtara. So we're still mired in this machlokas. Let's go back there. Shaul, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish as fine Rabbi Yochanan. Zu Shishan Zeh Shishan b'Mishnah b'Mishnah's Bar Kapara. We learn the following idea in the Mishnah of Bar Kapara. What did Bar Kapara say? Listen to this. Hari Shaya Ochel Sada. Listen to this. There was a guy, Reuven, and Reuven was consuming produce in a field. So for a very long time, Reuven was using this field, and he was consuming the produce, and everyone around assumed that Reuven was the owner, and not right, because v'kara alav echad irer lomer shalihi. Shimon comes along and Shimon says, Reuven, not your field. Not your field, that is my field. So now what happens? Reuven takes out a star. And what does it say in the star? The star shows that in fact Shimon sold Reuven the field. Okay, so in other words, supposed to hear what's happening. So Reuven using the field for some period of time uncontested, right? Everybody assumes it's his. Shimon comes along and says, "Hey, it's mine." So Reuven says, "Yes, it was yours, but lamaisa again, you sold it to me." Hotzi ze'es ono lomar shemecharti alon. So he takes out a star, right? He takes out a star that says, ultimately, again, you sold it to me. Or Reuven claims to Shimon, you gave it to me as a gift. So we'll say, listen to this. Okay, so now what does Shimon respond, right? So Reuven says, yes, it was yours, but you sold it to me. It was yours, you gifted it to me. So im amar eini makir b'shtar zamei olam. So we'll say, let's say, watch this. Let's say Shimon says, I never saw that star before in my life. Never saw that star before in my life. It must be a forgery. So what's the halacha? He's kaim hashtar bechol samav. Okay, kiyim stars. Kiyim stars. No, we have a mechanism for that. I will say, by the way, someone, just because you produce a document, we've seen this before. Just because you produce a document doesn't mean, okay, you won, right? Case over. A document could be forged. There could be so many document could be tampered with. So that's why there is a process of kiyum shtaras. So if Shimon claims, I never saw that document before in my life, no problem, certified and based in. Im amar shtar pasim huzeh. Oh, okay, so I'll say, here's where it gets interesting. Shimon says, yeah, you know what, I wrote that document. And in the document it says that Shimon sold Reuven the field, but Shimon says it's called the shtar pasim. What's the shtar pasim? Sometimes, if a person wanted to appear wealthier than they actually were, they would have their friend write to them a document of sale or a document of gift. So when I show up to the bank, I mean, this is probably fraud, but when I show up to the bank, right, and I want to secure the loan, or I want to do business with someone, so they say, oh, Reuven's got that field from Shimon. Now, Reuven doesn't own the field. Shimon's not going to make ownership of the field. It's a fraud. Fraud sounds so intense. It was a misrepresentation. Good. I like that better, right? It was a misrepresentation of the actual factual reality, right? So again, Shimon says, yeah, I wrote you that shtar, but that's a shtar pasim. I wrote you that shtar so that you should look wealthier than you actually are. Or shtar amana shebacharti lecha v'nosati damim. Or I made a mistake. What did I do? So we'll say shtar amana means sometimes if Shimon is selling something to Reuven, Shimon will write the document that says that the property is sold even before Reuven gives him the money because he trusts Reuven. All right, clearly misplaced trust in this situation, right? So Shimon says, yeah, I wrote the shtar, I gave it to you on good faith that you were going to give me the money, but you never paid me. So I will say, so what do we? We'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up Amiras Hashem with this case tomorrow. Finish up the Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and also get clarity in terms of what kind of raya, and get further clarity on how he passed like the Chachamim or like Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah. Shkayach, everyone. All right, have a great day, everyone. How are you? Good morning, good morning.